Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing to you guys another installment in my interview with an author series. This is going to be a traditional published Tuesday video. If you don't know what that is, that means that on Tuesdays I interview traditionally published authors about their author experience, their books, and what their writing process looks like. Today I'm super excited to be bringing to you guys an interview with the lovely Jarm Del Boccio, which if you don't know, she is a middle grade biblical fiction author. The biblical fiction nut or the biblical fiction novelist fan in me is screaming right now because I love biblical fiction, as you guys know, and I also love people who write biblical fiction because if you didn't know, I also write biblical fiction. So I'm super excited to get into this interview. I hope you all love it as much as I do. Let's get into the interview. Thank you so much, Jarm, for volunteering to be a part of my author interview project, traditionally published Tuesdays. For starters, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us all a little bit about you and who you are.
So thanks, Jenna, for being willing to interview me on Traditional Tuesdays. It's quite an honor, and here I go. So I am Jarm Del Boccio, the debut middle grade historical fiction author of The Heart Changer. And it is my debut. It's my first book, not the first book I've written, but the first book to be traditionally published. I didn't start out that way, though. I did like to write. I loved to read as a child. I wrote some stories in third grade that were quite dramatic and got a good grade for it. And I kept all kinds of diaries throughout my life. Here's just an example of a couple of them, but I have a whole stack of them, probably two feet worth, that I've been keeping throughout my life, writing about my joys and my heartbreaks, and you know what it's like if you keep a journal. So spilling my heart out onto the page. So many people have asked me how I knew I wanted to become an author. I actually found this book, one of my favorites, as a preschooler, I think. Do you know? It's kind of a Bible story quiz book. And as I was going through the pages, I found something that made me think, aha, this is what tells me that not only was this one of my favorite books, but I thought I could write one too. So, and I always tell the kids when I show them this, don't ever do this to a book. But I thought I could write my own story, just as good, if not better, than the other. So I was very tickled and laughed out loud when I saw this. And that's when it all began. So when I got older, my elderly mother died, and I panicked. I panicked because I thought, oh my goodness, has she told me everything there is to know about my childhood and about her childhood? And most of my other relatives of her siblings had passed away, even though my mother was the oldest. And I thought I better start writing these things down, and thought I was going to be a memoir writer. The Lord moved me into actually picture book writing, which is a completely different genre in a amazing way. Made some connections there, and I really enjoyed it. But I was discovering, because I was submitting and nobody was taking, that I just didn't have what it takes to write a picture book, because you have to keep under 800 words and tell a story in 800 words, and I'm verbose. I love to describe things, and I just wasn't cutting it according to the industry standard. So I have a backload of probably 30 picture books that I've written. Someday maybe I'll resurrect them, but we'll see. We'll see what the Lord has. But then a very well-meaning, and I'm thankful for her, author friend suggested, because I was very wordy and loved to describe, that I move into middle grade writing. And I did, and I absolutely loved it. It was my sweet spot, because I had anywhere from 25,000 to maybe 35,000 or even up to 50,000 words to play around with. And so that's what I did. And that's the beginning of my story.
What made you choose to write Christian fiction and historical middle grade biblical fiction specifically?
I actually started writing middle grade historical, or I started writing historical fiction, both picture books and middle grade. And that kind of moved into biblical fiction, which really biblical fiction is historical fiction, because as we know, it's true and it's from the books of history. And that was just what I grew up with. I've been a Christian since I was very young and dedicated my life to the Lord. And It just came naturally for me. I was a Sunday school teacher. I taught at a Christian school. I was also the school librarian. And so that came naturally to me. I love to study God's Word. So, and I love to find the little people in history and Scripture that have no name or backstory, and I give them one and write about them. So that's really my passion to do that. I think the reason why I love to write historical fiction and biblical fiction is because I want kids to know that people that lived long ago, in particular children, were just like them. Yes, they lived in a different century, and yes, they wore different clothing, and yes, they didn't have the internet or other more modern things, but they ate like we did, they slept like we did, they had the same feelings as we did, and same sorrows, same joys, and I wanted them to connect with history. Everyday or modern day heroes and superheroes are great. It's fun to kind of have fantasy and kind of go with that. But I think when it comes to the end of the day, kids need to know that real people were heroes as well, and that they can be the heroes of their own story. So that's really what my passion is, to show these people in history and Scripture, kids in particular, as I mentioned, who have made a huge influence in other people's lives. And I consider that a hero. And to bring it down to their level, to realize that they too can be the heroes of their own story. So that's really my passion and why I do what I do.
Can you describe your publishing journey with things like, how did you go about querying, submitting, getting an agent, if that's applicable, and ultimately becoming a traditionally published author?
So I think I've been writing, I would say, seriously for about 7 years, and I have just been privileged to be a part of numerous writers groups, secular writers groups, and these writers and authors have been super encouraging and super helpful, and I've taken lots of online courses, I've gone to conferences. I've been part of Tara Lazar's Story Storm in the past. It was actually Pibo Idmo, where I came up with an idea a day for the whole month of November, I believe it was back then, for a picture book. Then I got connected with Julie Hedlund's 12 by 12, writing 12 picture books in 12 months. But then when I moved on to middle grade, I didn't have such a good foundation, and so I had to kind of go off on my own, and still connecting with those authors that write picture books, but there's no overall organization other than SEBWI, which is the Children's Society of Children's Picture Book Writers and Illustrators, which also have conferences, and they've been helpful as well. So all of these things have been used in my life to bring me to the point where I understand the industry, the traditional publishing industry, what has to be done. Not that I do it correctly, not that I do it right, not that I always find the right sources, but it has been great instruction, and I continue to use these sources. And I think it was 2 years ago when I decided that I was going to submit twice a month for the entire year, and I actually met my goal. None of it actually came to be as far as getting a contract, and I, it was discouraging because I have submitted, I'm sure, between my picture books and my middle grade novels, at least 50 to 75 times with different agents and different publishers, editors, those at conferences. So it was for a while, and still is in some ways, discouraging for me. But one day I decided to try the faith pitch, which is on Twitter. And basically within a couple of lines, you describe do a little pitch where you describe your story. And if any of the agents or editors that are on the Twitter party for that day will like your post, and or your tweet, I should say, and then you have the permission to send them your manuscript according to their directions. And so I did that 2 years ago, and from that, I received the contract from Ambassador International for The Heart Changer. At that time, I had called it The Changing Heart, but I thought, nah, that sounds like a romance, so I think I'm going to make it more middle grade and change it to the Heart Changer, and I was glad I did. So that was basically how I got into the publishing not business, but got into having a debut novel. And I'm still pursuing all kinds of things, and I still continue to submit. I don't want that to be my only book.
Why did you choose the traditional publishing route?
I have tried to have an agent. I've submitted to a number of people, but my story didn't really grab them, or my stories that I've sent to them. So I haven't found the right agent, and maybe I'm not supposed to have one. I don't know. We'll leave that up to God. But anyway, I do try to do that because I would love to have somebody do the business side and be able to get into those publishing houses, especially Christian publishing houses that only accept agented authors. And so that's another reason why I'd love to have an agent. But he or she hasn't shown up yet, so I just keep submitting. The reason why I wanted to be traditionally published were a couple of reasons. I feel that the traditional publishers have a very high standard. They know what's out there. They know what readers want. And as frustrating as that can be, it actually translates into a extremely good product. They're very picky, and it will be something that generally can sell, that the public wants. As hard as that is to hear for me and for other people, that's the truth. So I wanted to rise to that standard and to be traditionally published and not independently publish until the future sometime, in the future sometime. What I believe traditional publishing is excellent for are series, fantasy books, which everybody just devours, science, sci-fi series, and those that write nonfiction, that go to conferences, that are businessmen or women that bring their books to the conference. It's super for that kind of genre. But for kids, not so much. I'd also heard that if you self-publish first and your book does not do well, you don't sell a lot, then if you try to publish traditionally, the publishers will look at your track record, and if they don't see that your first book sold, they're a little bit hesitant to take you on. So these are the things that I have heard over and over again. You may have found something different in your field or in your experience, but in general, those are the two reasons why I've decided to be traditionally published.
How long did it take you to write your most recently published book, The Heart Changer, from start to finish?
You know, it's so funny. I really don't remember how long it took to write The Heart Changer. I have the statistics in the back of my head for some of my other books, but that one, not so much. It was actually the second biblical fiction that I wrote, and I started it in kind of a chapter book fashion. The wording was a little older for chapter books, but it was basically the size of a chapter book, maybe 10,000 words. And I just decided I wanted to grow it into a middle grade novel, and I knew I had to at least expand it to 20,000 or more. And so I went about looking at each chapter and finding places I could expand into description, adding new scenarios or plot lines and new characters, and expanded it, and that's what I did. I would say I probably started it 8 or 9 years ago, maybe, and along the way, the last 5 years I've been, or I should say 7 years, have been tweaking it and sending it to critique groups. Critique groups are extremely important for a writer. I am in one online Word Weavers critique group, which I absolutely love, and then I have another author, published author, who comes and meets with me, and we critique each other's. I would love to be involved in a third group. I think the more groups you have, the better your stories are, and the better feedback you have. So definitely recommend that. So all that to say is I don't remember how long it took, but I'm thinking over a period of 2 to 3 years, I expanded. I wrote and expanded the Miriam story. Miriam is Naaman's wife, servant girl, my main character of The Heart Changer. I do know it's my second biblical fiction because I wrote what I thought would be a longer picture book, biblical fiction picture book, about the little boy whose lunch, who a little boy who gave his lunch to Jesus. I loved that story because he has no name, no backstory. We don't know how he got there, but I decided that I was going to write his story and tell folks where he came from and how he came to the decision to give his lunch to Jesus and what happened to him afterwards. So I won't know till I get to heaven if that's the truth, but we'll find out. So anyway, that's the first one I wrote. Then I expanded that to a chapter book. And at present, well, I'm actually not presently working on it, but that's one of my projects for the future is to expand that even into a middle grade novel. So I'm heading there with most of my work. So that's how I got to write The Heart Changer and my recollection of how it was written and how long it took.
The Heart Changer was also your debut novel, so would you mind sharing a little bit about that process of being a debut author?
I think this is a hard question, what the process was like for The Heart Changer. I had an inkling as to what it would be like to publish a book, and I thought I'd have this fantastic, great feeling and I finally arrived and such excitement, and I really didn't, and I was very surprised at that, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I was hoping to be published by the Big Five, which having a biblical fiction probably would not happen anyway. My desire was to publish in the secular arena because I wanted to be salt and light and encourage others in that way and just be part of the mainstream. But God had other ideas for this particular book. But no, it was a slow process. I had to be very careful because Ambassador International was a smaller publishing house and relatively unknown. I needed to do my homework and find out about the company and check it out, talk to some of my other friends, published friends, and ask their opinion on it, and of course pray about it. And went through, some bumps with deciding if I want to do this, if I don't want to do this, where I want to be, who I want to publish with. But I decided in the end that I would go with Ambassador International. And they are it's like a family. They're a very loving group of people that want to help you succeed. And they are very open to suggestions, which I really, really like. And they are a growing company and growing in every way, and I'm really thankful to be a part of Ambassador International, and thankful that they decided to take a chance on me and publish my book. So it's in this day and age, even if you're with a large one of the Big Five publishing houses or even Bethany House or one of the larger Christian publishers, you still, even though they're more well known and they have brochures and they pass on the word about your book in many ways to libraries and schools and that kind of thing, so you're more noticed, you still have to do your marketing. No longer are the days where someone else does your marketing for you. Every author has to learn how to market their own books and get out there and not that you have to speak if you don't want to speak, but you have to be involved in social media, maybe have an email list, which we're encouraged to do, have a website or a blog where people can find you. So it's a lot of hard work. And I figured it would be. My word for last year was perseverance, and I have to tell you, I've never persevered so hard for anything. Especially in marketing my book. And I'm glad I did it. I'm exhausted. I did my book launch, and God really gave me the strength to do what I needed to persevere. I've actually contacted, oh my goodness, probably 25, 30, maybe up to 50 bookstores and schools and universities and places where I'd love to speak. I'm a former school librarian and teacher, kindergarten teacher and high school art and home ec teacher, and so I love to be out in public. And that's my desire, to get out there and share my story with kids and the fact that God is writing their story, and also give them a little idea of what it's like to write a story, maybe a tutorial. So that's really where my heart's desire is, not just to publish a book and say I did it, but to give value to my readers and to kids who are my readers, and also to their parents. So I guess I would say that that's my journey up to this point. A lot of hard work. As I tell people, that unless you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or some other very famous author, obviously I'm not going to live in the French Riviera and have my apartment and fly anywhere I want to go. That's kind of a pipe dream for anyone. We're in the arts, and even back in the Renaissance, there were starving artists, and so nobody's going to get rich quick. And you have to do it because you love it, and that's exactly why I published as well, is because I love it and I have a message to share, and I want to encourage my readers, and God has given me a gift. So that's my experience and my reasoning.
What was one aspect of the traditional publishing industry that you found surprising?
So what surprised me about the traditional publishing industry, I don't think there were any surprises necessarily. Everything from connections. I think if you're with a bigger place, you have a lot more connections, and it's a little easier for you. But all publishers have contracts. All publishers have either royalties or advances. Not all. The smaller ones do not have advances. They just have royalties. Some of the royalties are at different levels. Some of them have different ways of printing your book. Either they print a number of them, hundreds of them, or just on demand. Really, it depends on the publisher themselves. So, but I think I was surprised at how much work I had to do in marketing. Now, no one says you have to do it, but I just really felt that if I've spent the time publishing a book and they've published my book, that it's something I can do for myself as well as the publisher. I also like to be out in the public, and I love to explore new things, and so I've learned so many things about being online and being live, and which is way out of my comfort zone. But anyway, I've tried, and I think in many ways I've succeeded. I don't know yet. I haven't gotten my first royalties, even though I published back in April, because you have to have a certain amount with our publishing house before you can do that. So I'll see that in a couple of months. Yeah, that's I guess those are my surprises, that it just takes a lot of hard work, and you have to invest financially in it, because you're going to be doing book launches, you're going to have to rent a venue, or you're going to have to travel, or you're going to have to buy prizes. There are just so many things, a lot of underlying costs, I guess you would say, and it just devoured all my time. So I just spent all my time on my book launch, and in the summer and into the fall, visiting schools and doing what I could to spread the word. So I think the work involved, but again, that's something that you can choose to do or not choose to do, depending on your publisher or your book. But it was a lot of work. And I guess I would have loved my publishing house to be more connected with the other Christian publishers and with the publishing world, but they're smaller, and they don't. But that's some way that I can maybe encourage them and help them.
What has been the hardest part of the traditional publishing experience, and what would you say maybe has been the most rewarding part of that experience?
I think, again, the hardest thing about traditional publishing is negotiating contracts. Thankfully, I had someone to help me with that, a lawyer. I think another hard thing was the marketing and figuring out my book launch. Those were difficult things. I think those were the hard things. What I really loved about publishing was the anticipation about my book coming out, choosing my cover. That's a whole nother story with my cover. I wanted to make sure, there's nothing that irritates me more as when I'm reading a book and the cover doesn't look anything like the heroine or the hero or like what's inside, and I feel like that's untruthful. And so I was determined that my cover was going to reflect my story, and I feel it did. It does not It does not mirror or reflect typical middle grade novels because usually they have some fantasy elements, some humorous element, diverse element, and even though it is a diverse book because it takes place in Syria and the girl is Hebrew, not the same kind of thing. And I didn't want to make people think it was a fantasy story when it was biblical fiction, so I wanted something realistic. I also didn't want to show her face because then if you read the story and you think that doesn't look like her and it kind of irritates you. So I wanted there to be some mystery about her. I wanted people to feel that she was lonely, that I'll show you the cover again, that she was lonely, she was out in the desert, she needed God, she felt abandoned. These are all things that I wanted to convey in my story. Or I should say my cover. And the cover art, the design person at Ambassador International was very patient with me. We went over 2 or 3 or 4 options, and she patiently worked with me, and we got it all to come together. I also loved working with my, I believe her name was Ashley, with my editor. And she really pushed me. I told her I wanted her to push me to say I wasn't really good with descriptions and other things, so please push me and ask me for more descriptions. And she did. She really did. We went through it 3 times. I think that's typical, that you start with a kind of a small overview of things, little things you can edit, and then that gives her a feel of how I respond. And then the second one was a huge edit. In fact, when I received it, she said, "Now just read my little report here and my comments, and don't do anything. Just put it aside, take a breather for about 2 or 3 days, and then come back to it and start." And I'm glad she did, because she had a huge amount of things for me to change and add and remove. But they, of course, were for the betterment of the story. So I really like that, working with a cover design person, and also with my editor. Those were my favorite parts, I think, of the whole process.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers who are maybe looking to be traditionally published also?
Boy, there are so many things that I could tell an aspiring author, aspiring writer, author. One thing is you have to be very well read. Depending on the genre, whatever genre you're planning on writing, you need to read in that genre frequently, daily if you can. Now, it doesn't mean you can't branch out. In fact, you should, just to get an idea of what else is out there, but you should really read in the genre you write. Secondly, always have a critique group or 2 to help you through, and belong to some national organizations that will help you, from ACFW, American Christian Fiction Writers, to SEBWI, as I mentioned, the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, Word Weavers. They have some great critique groups. There are just so many out there that you should always be part of a group. You should always be learning, going to conferences, taking classes. There are a lot of classes out online. You don't have to leave your home. These are all things that I would suggest, because in doing those things, you learn about the traditional publishing process, and you're able to submit to people. You have lists of people. Another really helpful thing is the Christian Market Guide. There's one out for 2020, and I would definitely suggest that you get that. There's also just a general secular one for writers. There's one for illustrators. There are ones for musicians. There are all kinds, even one for agents. Finding your right agent. Now, an agent is not absolutely necessary. It's wonderful to have. But you learn so much about the process just doing it on your own. As much as an agent would be wonderful, you have to give 10 to 15% of your proceeds to them, understandably, and they deserve it because they do a lot of hard work for you. But even that isn't magical. I know of so many people that they're on their second or third agent, because they say it's like a marriage, and if you don't get along with them after a while, that you have to separate from them, because they're not doing you justice, and maybe you're not doing them justice. So it doesn't mean you're going to have one agent for life, as much as that would be wonderful. So There are all kinds of ups and downs, but yes, I would say read. Oh, and another thing, of course, is writing every day. Julie Cameron is one of my favorite authors. She's out in the secular world, and she encourages people to do daily pages, which means you get a big notebook of paper, and every morning you write. Well, she recommends 3 pages, which is great, but I find I kind of peter out at about 1 or 1.5. But you just write anything. You write about your schedule for the day. You write about your frustrations. It doesn't have to be the story you're writing, but just to get you in the mood to write. And then I would definitely recommend story prompts. Story prompts are huge. I have one called Room to Write that I would definitely recommend for those that want to write every day. You can find story prompts online too, but have a little notebook or keep it on your iPad like I do. I do all my writing on my iPad. I wrote a 50,000 word novel on my iPad, which I absolutely love. I have very poor handwriting, and if I were to write by hand, it would take me weeks, months, years to translate it onto into a typed form. So I don't do that. I type right on the iPad, which I absolutely love. So you have to decide what your mode of writing is, but write. That's the whole idea. And then find people to submit to, and a critique group, and all those other things that are so important.
Where did the inspiration for the Heart Changer come from?
Where do I get my inspiration? Okay, well, the first place I get my inspiration is God's Word, of course. And as I've mentioned, I love to find the little people in Scripture who have no name or backstory. The little boy who gave his lunch is one example, and of course Miriam is another example of the Heart Changer, the main character. There are others. There are also all kinds of stories, even with adults, that you could write about that very little is known. When I write the story, though, I want to be very careful when I write biblical fiction that I do my research well, that I don't put words in people's mouths if there are words in Scripture to tell about it or to describe it. So I try to stay as close as I can to the to the biblical account of that story, especially if I'm doing something with Jesus, which I try to avoid because I don't want to put words in his mouth that weren't there. So that's a big challenge. But I didn't have to do that in Miriam's story, in Miriam's case. But I love the connections I made. When you find out what period of time and where they lived, you can make these connections and just say, hey, she probably would have known Elisha. And she probably knew the little boy that Elisha had raised from the dead. So you make all these connections, which I absolutely love. But I get my inspiration from Scripture. Sometimes when I'm sitting in church, someone will get up and say something, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I never thought of that before. And so I'll start writing a poem or just get it down, not there then and there, but I will write down something, send it to me in a message to remind me, and then hopefully get back to it later. My biggest inspiration is travel. I absolutely love to travel. It is my go-to for inspiration. I haven't been able to travel the last year and a half because of our financial situation. It's been very, very difficult. That's why my word for this year is contentment, because I have to be content with where God has put me. So I am trying, and with God's help, to do that. And find inspiration in the area. But I love traveling to new places. I love to take the red bus around, and I love to take tours, find out all these fascinating bits of information about people and places. And I love to blog about it. I love to share in Facebook, which is my go-to social media. I have a page as well, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter, although those aren't my favorite, but I'm learning how to use them. So really travel, going to a new place, experiencing new things, learning about history, because I'm a historical fiction author, and bringing them out in a way that will illuminate history and that will make sense of the past and bring it to the future, and helping people to be heroes of their own story, to say, yeah, I could do that kind of thing. I could be that person. Because they're true stories, and they've happened to people in the past, and they can happen to my readers as well. So holding up those examples and those places in history. So that's it. That's my travel is my go-to, and of course reading. But I home educated our kids, and there are many times we would read something in history or one of our books, and I'll say, oh, that would make a great story. And so those are my go-to for inspiration.
So since you write middle grade books, would you mind telling us maybe some things that might be different about writing middle grade as opposed to writing for a different market or a different audience?
In some ways, the writing process for middle grade novels or for children is the same, but it's really, I would say it's very different from adult writing. You still need plot, you still need characters, you still need description, you still need scenes. All those things are typical of all kinds of writing. But as far as the content and certainly the word level or the word count is going to be different. For children's picture books, it would be 800 words or less normally, sometimes 400, depending on the story itself. For a chapter book, it could be 8 to 10,000 or maybe 12,000. For a middle grade novel, anywhere from 25,000 to maybe 50,000. And then YA is 50 to 75, 80 or so, and then adult goes on. But YA is more like adult, but middle grade and children's, of course, is completely different. You have to understand what young children want, what they like, especially the fears and the everyday challenges that they experience. Not only preschoolers and toddlers, and what is their world? You have to examine what is their world. What do they experience on a daily basis? So those are things that you have to think about when you're writing for children. Now, middle grade is a genre that I enjoy just because I enjoy middle graders. They have a lot of fun and energy and full of adventure and spunk. They are not, though, high schoolers, and so we don't discuss relationships with the opposite sex. We don't talk about murders and about horrible things that happen because middle graders have not experienced that kind of thing. We don't have any swearing in our story. Now, there are some out in the public, that general secular public, that would have some of those things, but in general, middle grade is that. It's all about what middle graders experience. They have angst. Certainly my character, Miriam, had angst. She was really angry at what happened to her, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Kids love friendships. Friendships are very important to a middle grader. They want to succeed. They want to be important. They sometimes get embarrassed with who they are and what they look like. The angst comes in there. Sometimes they have hurtful things in their family that happen. They have a divorce. Someone dies. Those are real things that kids face. So these are all things that we want to incorporate into our stories when we write for middle graders.
So I know that you used to be a teacher and a school librarian. Do you think that past experience kind of helped you as you transitioned to being a children's/middle grade author because of your previous experience with children? Or did that in any way affect your decision that you felt called to write middle grade fiction?
Yes, I was a school librarian and a kindergarten teacher and high school art and home ec teacher at a Christian school in Chicago, and then I went on to be a nanny for 2 years, and then I taught one family's children in the bush in Papua New Guinea. So I do have a lot of experience and taught Sunday school and worked with kids clubs. I do have a lot of experience with kids, and I'm sure that's why I like to write for them, because it's not just for entertainment. I'm a truth teller, and I love to tell the truth in my stories, but in a fictional way. And I want kids to be encouraged. I'm very much an encourager. So whatever they're experiencing in their life, I want to not only encourage them, but lead them towards God and towards Scripture, and just let them know how applicable it all is and how much they need it. And it's not something archaic or unnecessary, but that a relationship with God is a very important thing and can completely change their life, of course. So that is my reason for writing middle grade. And of course, as a school librarian, I had contact with a lot of books. And the book, book world, publishing world has completely changed now. Not so much picture books in the Christian genre, but even that has changed, but certainly in middle grade and YA and that kind of thing. So it's not just a Bible story a day kind of thing, or there are just so many different things so many different experiences kids have these days that they have to talk about. And always a book is a good way for them to experience that with someone else or in a character's life, and then they can talk about it later. So this world is not getting easier to live in, it's getting more difficult. And the book world reflects that. Sometimes it's frustrating because it reflects it in a negative way, or in an unbiblical way, which is quite frustrating for me, because I'm a truth teller and base everything I do, even though I have a couple of historical novels that aren't Christian in nature, but they come from a Christian worldview, because I am a Christian, and that's we write because of who we are, and I firmly believe that. So yes, it has made a huge influence, maybe even the way this causes a little problem, because you never want to be didactic anymore. That's the biggest change between the publishing world now and the publishing world back when I was a kid, or even when I was a school librarian. In those days, even the classics would teach. They'd teach you and say, now boys and girls, this is what we want you to learn. And being a teacher and a librarian, I am very much like that, and I have to be very careful that I don't do a lot of didactic teaching, that I let the kids discover it for themselves in my story. So that can be very challenging for a teacher and librarian, to not be didactic and not preach, is what they say in the secular world. Don't preach to your kids. They're smart enough. They can understand, your readers can understand what you're saying and what you really mean if you write a good story. And show it, don't tell it. And those are two of the challenges I have: not being didactic, not preaching, and to show and not tell what's going on in my story. So I have to say, those were my challenges, and being a librarian and a teacher sometimes doesn't really help, but I think in general it did.
What parts of the story do you think speak to a middle grade audience specifically?
When I look at my book, The Heart Changer, I was mentioning before that Miriam, the main character, has angst. I mean, here she is. She's been taken from her home that's been destroyed by Naaman's Syrian army. Her village is destroyed. She has no idea what's happened to her family. She's taken from what's familiar in her little Shunammite town, and she's taken up to Syria to work for Naaman's wife. And of course, she's angry. She's bitter. She's angry at God, and she did have a faith, but the faith is tested, which in all cases, faith is tested, no matter what our age, but especially in middle grade and YA and high school and beyond. So she experiences hurts. She experiences unjust behavior, and she has to deal with that inside, thinking of her faith and remembering what her parents told her, and what she learned about God, and she has to bring this all into her situation where she is just at this time, and for it to be real to her. And what I love about this story, even though I've written it, is I called it The Heart Changer, not just because Naaman's heart was changed, which we know it is, and that's why he went to the river to wash, and not only was his health changed, but his life was changed. He turned to the one true God. But in my story, I figured that Miriam would have to have a huge impact, because she's the one that connected Elisha with her. And she would have this angst. She'd have to have this angst in her heart. She'd have to be angry at Naaman, angry at his wife, angry at God. Because things like that do happen to middle graders. Things that make them angry, not that they're taken from their home. Some of them are, but so there's a big kind of thread running through that. Yes, this has happened to me, but this is what really should be my response. And if this is my response and my heart changes according to what God wants it to be, then I can change other people's lives. And that's really what happened in this story, is that as she learned that God still loved her, God still had a plan for her, that all was not lost, and at that point she didn't know about her family, that maybe God was using her in this situation to change other people's hearts. And that's what I love about this story, that even a little 12-year-old girl can make a huge difference in people's lives if she decides to be obedient to God and to trust Him for her life. And that's what I see happening in my story.
What kind of research did you do when you were preparing to write The Heart Changer? And were there any interesting little facts that you discovered that ended up playing a surprisingly significant role in the story?
Well, I have to be honest that I would not have done as much research in my book, since it's for middle graders, as, say, Maysu Andrews or Lynn Austin or Tessa Afsar would do in theirs, because, of course, it's an adult novel and there's a lot more detail. But I did want to make sure that, as much as I could, that the time period was correct, that the people that had interacting with each other would have been feasible, that the culture in Syria would have been feasible as well. It was understandable that it's accurate, that the gods they would have had would have been accurate, that the food they would have eaten, the plants they would have collected would have been typically what it was like. The language, hopefully, would have been typical of what it would have been like. The experiences, the faiths of other people, just so many things. I had to make sure that that would be true. I use my olive tree app on my iPad, and I have a whole pastor's library there with concordances and dictionaries and atlases and that kind of thing. So I went back and did my research, and I also relied, even though I did my research, I relied on input also from my editor, hoping that she would help me if I missed anything. So what did I find surprising? Well, there are a couple things I found surprising. I have to tell you that I had wonderful input from 3 young girls whose parents are missionaries in the Middle East. And they actually lived in kind of the area where Miriam would have been taken to, and in that part of the world. And so I would ask them for advice about, what would they have had for breakfast? What would the little girl have felt like? And that was very helpful to me. That was a fun part of my research. I also had a couple of friends of mine with Friends of Israel who know the Jewish culture. I wanted to make sure I was not offending any Jewish person that would read the book with the language I used, or using Yahweh or any other terms. I did not want to offend anyone there. So I did my research in that way. And I'm sure that there are things that somebody can find that will, in the future, that will say wasn't correct. But on the whole, I think I did a fairly good job of representing the culture and the country and the biblical aspect of it. And as I said in the back of my book, I look forward to seeing Miriam, whatever her name is, in heaven, seeing her in heaven and seeing how close I came to her story. So I look forward to that. But these are things that I have to think about. But the biggest reveal, one of my endorsers had questioned whether or not Miriam would be able to understand Arabic or the culture, the language then, Aramaic, Arabic, the language that they would have spoken in Syria. And I said, I better check that out. But I didn't want to go into this, her speaking one language and having to translate. That would take away from the story. And most novels don't ever do that, even though people are speaking French or Arabic or Hebrew or whatever it is. They don't really do that back and forth thing. So I found out from a professor at Moody Bible Institute that indeed the language that they learned, that Jesus knew, which is Aramaic, was kind of a bridge from Arabic in the languages of the Middle East to Hebrew. And so they would have been like Romance languages today, Portuguese and Spanish and French and Italian and Latin would have been very, very similar to one another because they're from the same branch of the language tree. And so I was thrilled to find that out. And I thought, no wonder Jesus spoke Aramaic and a number of other, because that was kind of a bridge language, almost like a trade language. So that was so exciting for me to find out. So I think that was my biggest reveal.
Finally, what do you hope that children and maybe even people of all ages could take away from The Heart Changer?
So I think I might have said it before, but I want my readers to realize that they can safely put their lives in the hands of God and know that He loves them, that He wants the best for them, that whatever happens to them has been filtered through God's finger of love, as Kay Arthur would say. That if they give their lives to God, that He does amazing things with them. He brings things all together. He makes them heroes, basically. Heroes of their own story, heroes of other people's story. If Miriam hadn't had a heart for her, had a changing heart for Naaman, she would have had that hatred the whole time, and Naaman would never have been healed. Now, Naaman was her enemy, and there's still enemies in between Israel and the Middle East, Arabs and Muslims today. But what would it be like if we were all sensitive? If we were sensitive, we were loving, we were kind, it would make so much difference in the world, and even a kid, even a middle grader, can make a huge difference if he or she can trust in God for his or her life, and go out and love others and help others, and realize that this world is not all it is. That yes, bad things happen, but that they all happen for a purpose. And when we see, as I mentioned in there's an example. My favorite scene was Naaman's wife, Adar, who was talking about, Miriam was relating the story of Joseph and how he had said that you meant it for evil to his brothers, but God meant it for good. And she's there at the loom, and she's got a tapestry there, and she kind of relates the fact, it clicks in her mind, Naaman's wife, Adara. She said, so just like these tangled threads underneath my tapestry, we look at them and they just make absolutely no sense. But your God looks from the top down at a beautiful pattern on the tapestry and sees how all those threads of different colors are going to come together in a beautiful pattern. And that's what I want my readers to know, that all these tangled threads and broken threads and different colors and what looks like an underside of the tapestry doesn't make any sense, that giving their lives to Christ will make a huge difference and will bring all those things together into a beautiful pattern for their life. So thank you so much. I have just loved being able to share my story with you, and I pray that it's a blessing.
Thank you so much to Jarm for participating in this author interview. It means so much that you were willing to come on here and participate, and that you also were able to reach out to me and express interest in being a part of this project. It's so cool to see how so many authors are hearing about the author interview project and are willing to participate. If you don't know anything about the author interview project yourself, then let me enlighten you. My author interview project consists of 2 parts: self-published Saturdays and traditionally published Tuesdays. On one of those 2 days of the week, I will post a new author interview with a Christian fiction author or an author who writes in a Christian fiction subgenre to interview them and pick their brain about all the different facets of the Christian publishing industry. There's a lot of people out there that are going to tell you about writing. There's a lot of people out there who are going to give you advice on how to break out into the publishing world. But I wanted to create a series that was specifically about Christian fiction publishing as a form of ministry, and writing as a way to glorify our Creator who inspires us all to create in turn. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then be sure you subscribe for more weekly author interviews. If you're more interested in me, then don't worry about that either, because I also post weekly bookish videos like reading vlogs, fun tags, and all sorts of crazy bookish videos. So if you like that, then make sure that you have even more reasons to subscribe to this channel. You can also find me on social media. I'm active there almost daily on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all of that fun stuff. I especially love Instagram and doing the whole Bookstagram thing. So if that's something you're interested in, then be sure you go and check out all of those links in the description box below. Both my links will be in the description as well as Jarm's links. So make sure you go and check out all of those, because it really is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the description box, guys. You gotta check it out. Once again, thank you so much for watching. My name is Jenna Van Mourik. I'm an inspired writer and an inspirational fiction reader who reads, writes, and lives for Jesus. I hope to see you guys in a video coming soon. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!